Most people believe power comes from words, from winning arguments, being the loudest voice, shutting people down. But the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche saw it differently. He believed true power isn't loud, it isn't boastful, it doesn't need to prove itself. Real power is silent. Because silence, when used intentionally, is not weakness, it's control. And control is power. But this idea isn't new, it's ancient. In nearly every spiritual tradition, from Buddhism to Stoicism, from Taoism to Christian mysticism, silence is praised not as emptiness, but as depth. In a noisy world, silence isn't absence. It's a presence, a force, a form of speech that doesn't beg for ears. Think about the last argument you had. Maybe it was with a friend, a coworker, or someone online. You probably thought you were fighting over facts, logic, truth, but chances are you weren't. Most arguments aren't about truth. They're about identity, about ego and survival. The most powerful individuals in any group aren't the ones who monopolize the conversation. They're the ones who skillfully guide the dialogue. They don't interrupt, don't over-explain. They pick their words carefully, making everyone hang on their every word. That's why true leaders rarely raise their voices. When they speak, people listen, because they've built that sense of authority through their calmness. When someone challenges your belief, it feels like an attack on who you are. It's not you're wrong, it's you are less. And so we defend, not to discover truth, but to protect ourselves. This emotional resistance is ancient. It goes back to when being wrong could mean being cast out from the tribe. So your brain doesn't want truth. It wants safety. It wants belonging. And arguments? They're a battle for belonging. Even in politics, religion, identity, we rarely debate ideas. We protect tribes. We defend narratives that hold our place in the world. And here's the catch. The stronger the emotion behind your defense, the less likely you are to consider you're wrong. The louder the defense, the more fragile the foundation. So arguments become theater, a performance of certainty masking inner insecurity. The need to argue becomes an addiction. We scroll endlessly, hunting for battles to prove we exist. We don't ask, is it true? We ask, can I win? And in chasing victory, we forfeit wisdom. Arguments often arise from deeper psychological needs rather than mere disagreements about truth. Many people engage in arguments primarily to protect their egos and identities. The struggle to acknowledge being wrong can feel like a loss of self, leading the mind to resist acceptance at all costs. We don't just argue over facts. We're arguing over who we are. When someone challenges something we deeply believe in, it feels like they're attacking us personally. That's why discussions about hot topics like politics or religion can escalate into intense confrontation so quickly. It's not just about the ideas. It feels our very selves are being questioned. The strong individual doesn't fall into that trap. They take a step back, observe the situation, analyze it, and then choose whether or not to engage. They carve out their own sense of truth. Think about the influential leaders you admire. Did they waste energy arguing with their critics? Of course not. They focused on their vision, ignored distractions, and let their actions make a statement. Power dynamics play a significant role in discussions, as many debates go beyond facts or logic to become contests for dominance. Elements such as who has the final say, who controls the conversation's tone, or who can make the other person concede are central to these interactions. Social validation is another motivator behind some arguments. Individuals may not be deeply invested in their position, but rather seek to appear intelligent, confident, or strong to their peers. These behaviors can signify a lack of control, as reacting emotionally in a discussion often indicates a loss of personal power. Modern psychology backs this up. There's confirmation bias. We only seek what already agrees with us. Then there's the backfire effect. The more you're challenged, the more stubborn you become. And finally, the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less we know, the more confident we feel. Put simply, most arguments are about people shouting past each other, pretending it's about facts, when really it's about fear. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He believed the person who needs to argue has already given away something vital: their composure, their center, their power. Research in behavioral psychology shows that staying composed during a disagreement makes you much more persuasive than if you let your emotions flare up, because we naturally equate calmness with confidence. Nietzsche asserted that real power lies in self-mastery. The Übermensch doesn't let emotions dictate their actions. They take a moment to decide how to respond. That's what makes them untouchable. To Nietzsche, emotional reactivity is a form of slavery. It means your buttons can be pushed, your mind hijacked. And the more reactive you are, the easier you are to manipulate. Nowhere is this more obvious than online. Social media thrives on outrage. It rewards reaction, not reflection. The more divisive your post, the more engagement you get. Algorithms don't amplify truth, they amplify emotion. So we perform. We post, not to understand, but to be seen. We argue, not to grow, but to belong, to prove we're on the right side. It's Nietzsche's nightmare, a society where individuality is drowned in digital tribalism, where the self isn't discovered, but constructed for applause. Social media doesn't connect individuals, it connects masks. And behind every argument, every hot take, is fear. Fear of invisibility, fear of being wrong, fear of not mattering. But the person who stands apart, who doesn't react, doesn't perform, they aren't invisible. They're powerful. Because in a world desperate for attention, silence is magnetic. He who angers you controls you. So why give away your power just to be right? True strength is being unshakable. And the unshakable don't yell. They don't chase approval. They wait. They watch. They move with intention. This wasn't just theory for Nietzsche. It was a mirror to society. He watched 19th century Europe obsess over appearances, conformity, and blind morality. He challenged its herd instincts. And for that, he was called mad. But madness is often the name society gives to those who stop playing pretend. Nietzsche knew a silent man in a noisy world isn't lost. He's dangerous. Nietzsche's idea of power wasn't about domination through speech. It was about influence through presence. He called it the will to power, the inner force to shape reality, not through noise, but through force of will. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is frequently misunderstood. It doesn't refer solely to physical force, but rather to the capacity to shape one's reality. This influence doesn't always require vocal expression. Sometimes the most profound strength lies in the ability to remain unreactive. And from that, he envisaged the Übermensch, the person who doesn't react, who chooses when to speak, and when to stay absolutely silent. The Übermensch isn't interested in being right. They're interested in becoming whole. They win, not by controlling others, but by mastering themselves. They don't need to be understood, because their clarity comes from within. They don't seek applause, because their validation isn't rented from the crowd. It's rooted, self-sourced. The Übermensch is the quiet storm, centered in chaos, posed in uncertainty, not because they're detached, but because they're grounded. Their silence is not emptiness, it's containment, power, condensed. The Übermensch doesn't engage in arguments merely to win or make a point, because he possesses a deeper understanding of power dynamics in interpersonal exchanges. Nietzsche was laughed at, ignored, vilified in his time. But today, his fingerprints are everywhere, in self-help, in leadership psychology, in existential therapy. He taught that the individual must forge their own values, that herd thinking dilutes the soul, and that silence, solitude, suffering, even madness, can be paths to strength. He foresaw a world overwhelmed by noise, a world desperate for meaning, and a new kind of human who could create meaning for themselves. That's what the Übermensch really is. Not a perfect being, but a person who no longer argues with the world because they've made peace with themselves. Picture a meeting. Two people disagree. One is emotional, defending every point. The other listens, calm, still. They don't speak until it matters. When they do, it's deliberate, precise, unignorable. And suddenly, the room shifts. That's power. This is what Nietzsche meant. Silence isn't retreat. It's restraint. It's keeping your sword sheathed until it's absolutely needed. If you're always reacting, you're being controlled. Controlled by emotion, by the frame, by someone else's energy. Silence, then, is more than the absence of speech. It's the presence of inner order. It's the loudest thing no one hears. People feel silence deeply because in it they sense discipline, conviction, power. Let's look at three people who mastered this kind of power. First, Socrates. He never argued. He asked questions. Socrates believed that the first step to knowledge was recognition of one's ignorance. Accordingly, his method focuses not so much on proving your point, but on disproving the other person's point with a series of questions, resulting in their puzzlement. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," he'd ask, "Why do you believe that?" Then, "What do you mean by that?" And one by one, people would unravel their own logic. Socrates didn't win by force. He won by guiding people to defeat themselves. His silence between questions wasn't passive. It was purposeful. It created space for thought. It made others feel the weight of their words. And in that quiet discomfort, truth revealed itself. Sadly, For all his contributions to modern society, Socrates was widely hated in Athens, mainly because he regularly embarrassed people by making them appear ignorant and foolish. He was also an outspoken critic of democracy, which Athenians cherished, clearly guilty of the crimes with which he was charged, corrupting the youth, rejecting the city's gods, and inspiring disrespect for authority. Socrates was sentenced to death by poison. Second, Steve Jobs. He was intense, but not wasteful. Jobs didn't argue every point. He picked his battles. He let people think they were choosing, then made them see what he already knew. His speaking style was casual. It almost seemed like he was just chatting with a group of friends at a coffee shop, not in front of a capacity crowd at an Apple presentation. Jobs' secret persuasion sauce was to communicate in front of a large group the same way you would be talking with your spouse or your best friend. Bottom line, Steve Jobs looked at presentations as conversations. He used silence like a scalpel, letting the weight of a pause do what words couldn't. He didn't need to defend every decision, because his conviction was felt, not explained. That's not manipulation. That's vision with restraint. Our third master of silent power was Miyamoto Musashi, a samurai who won 60 duels, mostly with psychology. Musashi emphasized the importance of understanding the rhythm and timing of combat, adapting to changing circumstances, and exploiting the opponent's weaknesses. He stressed the need for a calm and focused mind, the ability to perceive the big picture of a battle, and the importance of disciplined training. Before a famous fight, Musashi showed up late, on purpose. Hours late, his opponent grew angry, unfocused, emotional. Musashi struck quickly and won effortlessly. He didn't just fight the man, he defeated his mind. His greatest weapon wasn't the blade, it was silence. Waiting, letting the enemy destroy themselves from within. Each of these masters knew silence isn't emptiness. It's precision. It's leverage. It's patience weaponized. So, what did all these masters of silent power have in common? They didn't argue. They didn't react. They didn't fight every fight. They waited. They observed. They stayed composed. And when they acted, it counted. That's real power. Because silence isn't about avoidance. It's about control, self-mastery, discipline. Silence doesn't scream. It resonates. It echoes. It penetrates. It cuts through noise by refusing to become it. And in that stillness, people lean in. They feel something deeper, something centered. You. Let your silence do the talking. Let your presence make the statement. Let your restraint be your edge. So ask yourself, am I speaking because I choose to, or because I feel the need to prove myself? Am I reacting, or am I controlling the frame? Am I chasing a win, or choosing peace? Because the one who needs to argue has already lost. The person in control doesn't need to say much. Their silence says enough. So remember, power isn't loud. It isn't emotional. It isn't reactive. Real power is silent. Real power is restraint. Real power is you not needing the last word. Because when you master silence, you master yourself. And when you master yourself, you master the world.